Hello and welcome. Thanks for clicking on the channel. I hope that you stick around for at least 5 more seconds so that way you can watch the tornado bird get absolutely dunked on. I wanted to make a video around Flameblast. I recognize and know that fire skills aren't exactly in a good place. It is certainly an off-meta skill, but I wanted to see if I could force my way through content to be able to engage with all endgame content and hopefully beat all endgame content. So before I dive into that any further, I just want to show one of my deaths that I'll have coming up here in the next 20 seconds or so. I just found this to be a wildly unfair series of events that he can perform at the same time. It's not good practice to have two one-shot mechanics backed up by one another. Now, granted, this falls into the get good category most likely, where I could have stood outside the ring and then dove into it, or in my case, I had enough energy shield, I probably could have tanked it, but I wasn't sure if there's going to be another burst of damage at the end. So I recognize that was a failure on my part. Moving forward, I'm not going to really discuss some of the issues with endgame content or the pinnacle bosses. That's not what this video is going to be about. But I will say that I was able to power my way through T4 Est, T4 King of the Mist. Eventually I was able to beat him, the Arbiter of Ash, on T3 before I hit a point. Yeah, I just didn't enjoy fighting him enough to want to try and power my way through the T4 version of it. The only content it ended up struggling with that I kind of gave up on was Simulacrum. Granted, I only gave it one shot. I was able to comfortably make it to about 12 or 13, but due to the channeling aspect of this skill, the charge up time can be a little bit too long and allows the monsters to dive bomb you, and it makes recovery difficult. Would there be a way to do it and be able to beat Simulacrum with a Flameblast build? Absolutely. I don't have any doubt about that. I'm a little one-dimensional in my builds at times where I see energy shield, I go energy shield, and I just stack it as high as possible. I recognize that you could potentially stack mana or some of the other skills that converts your all incoming damage to your mana pool, and maybe that would be better for recovery. It's kind of hard to say. We'll say that I don't get one shot by too many abilities, and even T4 Est, for example, with a giant hand that comes crashing down. I was able to tank that once, barely, if I was at full health, and I recognize that's something I should probably dodge. So, once again, I wanted to show off Flameblast as a self-casting skill. And while I'm talking, we'll go ahead and keep the action rolling in the background while I go through each of the individual gear pieces, and I'll let you know some of the upgrades I've made along the way. I would say that total investment on this originally was maybe 5 to 6 divs before eventually started expanding upon that further, and by the time I was done I probably hit the 25 div mark, with a good chunk of that being ingenuity that I had found from King of the Mist. So let's start off with the staff, and I will say that I did start off with a staff versus a wand and focus, not for any specific purposes originally. I was just thinking, I'm like, oh, staff is pretty cool, I want to use this, but there's a lot more defense capability and mana regen you can obtain while doing a wand and a focus versus just the staff. And that was one of the problems I ran into as I began to level up this skill. It hit a point where the mana cost was so high per second that I wasn't able to maintain consistent Flame Blast. Now, I could do it through excessive use of potions and hold on to it for a while, but once I made the change and got Ingenuity in the end, the mana regen did hit a point where it was acceptable enough where I could maintain performing consecutive Flame Blast, getting consistent damage out with very little issue. So let's dive into the first staff that I had. As you can see here, I went for as high to plus all fire skills as I could, along with additional damage. I found that since I didn't have a lot of damage converted to extra types of damage, that this got me a higher benefit than just going straight increased fire damage. Because unfortunately you can't use things like Archmage because they don't apply to channeling skills. Now I do use Archmage when I'm using Fireball and going through maps, or if I feel like mixing it up a little bit. But Fireball I don't use going through the trials, either Chaos or Sanctum, or the Secamus. And I will say that because I had a crash a little while back while casting fireballs where it seemed to do something to my PC, and as a result, it dropped me out of a Trial of Chaos, and I lost all progression on that. Fortunately, I can roll through the Trials of Chaos in about 13 to 15 minutes in that realm. And the Sanctums, depending on how quickly I end up getting movement speed, I can power through a lot of those within probably 30 to 35 minutes or so. So I can do a little less than 2 an hour. So let's take a look at the chest piece that I have next. I settled on a 900 energy shield regen chest piece because I wanted large amounts of cast resist and I wanted the implicit for the additional mana. Surprisingly, I picked that up for maybe a few divines back at the time, but anymore, anything I looked at that would be higher than that and still had cast resist either just flat out didn't exist, or you're talking 15 to 20 plus div realm, which is just out of the question. I had no desire to grind that much content. Next, let's take a look at the belt. Before I picked up Ingenuity, I grabbed this belt for about a div. It wasn't hard to find something with decent mana on it, and about 105 to 110 total resistances on there. I picked that up to alleviate some of the stress on some of the other gear, so that way I could focus my rings more on either cast speed or mana regen, because as I said earlier, mana regeneration was an issue for quite a while. I think I've got that mostly solved right now. But I'm sure if you were to invest further into it, you could get the mana aspect figured out even further. And that was really what was holding it back. So talking about the helmet, I just wanted something with as high energy shield as possible, with a decent amount of mana, and had a tad bit of rarity on there. Rarity at the time that you see me making this video was probably around 63, 65%. After Ingenuity, it bumped it up to over 85, maybe 88%. The helmet, nothing special about it, just wanted to get as much mana and as much energy shield as possible within the realm of reason. I wasn't too interested in going overboard on the cost of that particular item. Moving on to the amulet, I needed a minimum of 49 spirit and the cast resist and fire resistance in order to cap my resistances. Of course, having mana and added energy shield was a bonus. Now granted, I only have +1 on there. I wasn't able to find +2 with all the suffixes that I wanted without making significant changes to my other gear pieces, so I just never put the investment into moving the suffixes around for resistances in order to accommodate that. And the reason behind the 49 additional spirit is because I was using blasphemy with flammability, and I was doing that because I did not want to self-cast my curses. I wanted them to be cursed as soon as they came within a certain proximity. The other issue I had with flammability as a self-cast is by the time you start adding on support gems, the cost of casting a single curse was in the 800 to 1000 range for mana cost, and I need to reserve that for our ability to cast consecutive Flameblast in a row against the stronger, more tanky enemies. Moving on to one of my rings, what I was looking for here, as you can see, is just fire damage, mana, cast speed, intelligence, and mana regen. There are rings out there where you can get significantly more mana, and along with mana regen, and that possibly could have solved some of my mana regeneration issues. But at the same time, cast speed, being able to charge up Flameblast to the 10 stack faster, I felt like was also a crucial piece to have on there. As you can see, I didn't have any resistances on there because I was able to alleviate that load for resistances on rings and move a lot of it to the belt, some of it to my gloves and my chest piece. The other ring that I have here, very similar stats, but I needed more cast resistance, and I wanted to get as much mana regeneration and mana on this one as I could, once again without spending an arm and a leg to get such a piece of gear. Sadly, it does have a dead mod on there. Accuracy doesn't do us any good, but looking at the trade site is a little bit bleak at the moment, and there's not really a whole lot out there that I'd be able to replace it with that would even be remotely comparable without going into the 45, potentially 50 div realm. After that, we have the gloves. Once again, I needed a lot of resistances in the gloves, and I was trying to get as much mana as I could. once again, within the realm of reason. I was not interested in going overboard on cost. I keep emphasizing that because I was trying to keep my costs down. Plus, I don't have a significant amount of time to play to be able to just sit there and grind out currency for days on it. So as you can see, it was predominantly just a lot of resistances, a high roll of intelligence, and okay on the energy shield aspect with a decent mana aspect on it too. Moving on to the boots, you can see that I have the 35% movement speed. That's an absolute must if you're not going to be one-shotting every pinnacle boss in the game. And there's just too many one-shot mechanics that you either have to move out of or move towards that are just... It's an impossibility without either using Blink or without having at least this much movement speed, and even then I feel like it's cutting it really close. Of course, on there you saw that I had Rarity along with Reduced Freeze Duration and a Resistance. I was able to get my Reduced Freeze Duration up to 100% through the use of one of the Against the Darkness Timeless Jewels, and becoming immune to freeze is so beneficial. There's so many benefits to that. Being frozen is horrible in this game. There's not a whole lot of ways to be able to mitigate that without just simply reducing the freeze duration, but I feel like that still takes a bit of investment. And yeah, as you're well aware of the speed at which monsters move in this game and how quickly they jump you being frozen, even if you cut that time in half, they can jump you and kill you within a couple seconds. So let's talk about the upgrades I've made, moving to a wand and a focus versus a staff. So once again, there's no mystery here. We all want cast speed. We all want increased damage. Once again, this character, due to it being a channeling skill, doesn't have a lot of conversion to extra types of damage. So getting that on there I felt was more beneficial than just getting enhanced damage. And once again, unless you're going maybe with Archmage, where you already have so much added extra as lightning damage, then maybe that wouldn't scale up as well versus just getting straight up increased damage. Getting +5 is an absolute must, because for spells, every one level that you gain on that, you're going to gain about 10% increase in power. Next piece is the focus, of course. We wanted a minimum of +2 to all skills with more cast speed, some mana, and the big piece is going to be the mana regen. In case you haven't noticed, for the runes, I went with mostly increased mana regeneration because that was the biggest problem. By the end, by the time I about finished it up, the cost per second for mana consumption was about 1,050. Originally, when I was making this video with the staff, my regen was only around 325 to 350. Of course, I have the mana font on my solar flare or my solar orb that allows me another 30% increased mana regeneration. So as long as I'm within a decent proximity, it gives me a little bit extra. But 300 to 350 just was not cutting it. By the time I added ingenuity and moved over to the wand and the focus, my mana regeneration had gotten up to about 550. And while I certainly feel like I could have gotten that a little bit higher, once again, I just hit a point in the league that after playing for about 2 months on and off, that I have accomplished everything that I want to accomplish at that point. So let's go ahead and get into some of the jewels that I had as well. Most of my jewels are typically based around either added damage or improving or increasing the ignite factor. I really wanted to try to make ignite work. I feel that the best that I got it by the time I was done was maybe around 250 to 300,000 DPS on a full Flameblast damage ignite. If I had the double shocks going, if I had the resistance is lowered by 70% through exposure, along with the curse for another 30% there. And then yeah, if you end up landing an ignite while you've got all that going, then yeah, it was hard to somewhat calculate visually on some of the bosses, but you can see the numbers dragging their health bar down, and it was probably in the 200 to 300,000 damage range. So let's take a look at some of the jewels. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time here because some of the jewels are pretty self-explanatory. As you can see, Prism of Belief adds +3 to Flameblast skills. I originally started off with a +2, cost me about 45 exalts, and I was hesitant to upgrade to the third additional skill point on there because of the additional mana cost at the time. And once I got that sorted out, it felt a lot more comfortable to add the additional level. Moving on to Against the Darkness. Now I picked this one up for also about 2 divines. It's a pretty undesirable secondary small passive in the radius. Where I have it on my skill tree, it adds about 65% reduced freeze duration. So that in conjunction with my boots, it got me over 100%, and that's what I was using on most content. I will say I did have a second one on there that I would swap in and out if I was fighting the Arbiter of Ash that had reduced ignite duration, and I also picked up a second chest piece that had somewhat similar stats, but didn't exactly meet my needs for mapping and things of that sort. Didn't have the resistances necessary, but it also reduced ignite duration. So in fighting Arbiter of Ash, I would have 100% reduced ignite duration, so that way the ignites weren't as much of a problem. So moving on finally to the Ascendancy, of course it's Stormweaver. We want a double shock. We wanted Archmage permanently, and I picked up the additional 20% to exposure. In case you didn't know, the additional negative 20% to exposure adds to the baseline. So instead of the base being 20 and all multipliers going off of 20, it now goes off of 40, so making it doubly as effective for any additional multipliers that you have. As I said, I got my exposure up to about negative 70%, and my shocks I had enhanced up to about 57% per shock for 2 shocks, so I guess a grand total of about 114%. So let's talk about how I get there. I have Flameblast level 32, and obviously, as you could tell, if I really got a better amulet, I could have bumped that up another one to 33. I do have a level 21 Flameblast that I got lucky with corrupting it as a 6 link, and it added an additional +1 level on there. What we have on here, we only have 1 damage support gem on here, and that's the support gem that adds or increases damage and ailments by another 30%. So what we have on here is we have the support gem that when you hit an enemy with Ignite, it applies exposure for 8 seconds. After that, we have 25% increased cast speed. The next one on there is going to be when the enemy is ignited, your shocks do not expire. Because obviously on your Ascendancy, reducing the shock duration from 4 seconds to 2 seconds in order to get double shocks doesn't really feel all that great. And so if it lasts as long as your Ignite does. My Ignite lasts about 5.5 seconds. So as long as I'm constantly reapplying Ignite, the shock will stay on them for a significant amount of time. Then after that, I ended up putting on another support gem that enhances the magnitude of shock by 75%. And so that's how we got to the 57% number times 2. So really they're being hit with a 114% shock value. Now for everybody's favorite part, the skill tree. Once again, I am using a weapon swap. The secondary weapon that I have is a staff that's +5 to all spells to enhance the sigil power even further. And basically what I went with for the additional 24 skill points was to simply enhance the duration of that skill. So my sigil power had a massive AoE, and it will last up to about 37 or 38 seconds by the time it was done. What I was going for the primary skill was once again this fire damage, elemental damage, increased magnitude, increased exposure, and trying to get as much ignite and as fire damage on there as I could. And I almost forgot, I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, is I also use Bone Offering, and that's why you see me with the summons. What Bone Offering does, it converts the summons to kind of what like an old school totem would be, where it enhances your spell damage by another 37 or 38%. We have that on there specifically only for bosses. It's not needed in any capacity against regular mobs. Just the straight Flame Blast is enough to annihilate or eliminate most enemies in the game. So as you can see from the previous screenshot, the Flame Blast damage on the tooltip is only 4491. And while that most certainly doesn't seem like a lot, believe me, it is more than sufficient to be able to handle just about any content in the game. Final burst damage by the end was around 1 million, maybe 1 million plus. If you include the ignite would burn for about another 1.2 to 1.5 million, somewhere in that realm. So thanks again for being here. I greatly appreciate you guys. If you guys have any questions or comments, certainly feel free to leave them, and I'll do my best to get back with you. And so, yeah, thanks for being here and witnessing the glory of Flameblast and all that it has to offer. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and you all take care. Thanks.